Welcome again to another episode of the Southwest Climate Podcast. Mike Crimmins.
Zachary, how's it going? Did it rain at your house yet?
It has not rained at my house yet.
Okay.
In fact, I cannot remember the last day it actually did rain.
That's what we're going to talk about today, right?
We have a lot to cover today.
So much. Ben wrote so much stuff on the board.
2 boards, actually.
It is in 2 boards.
So thank you all for tuning in for the next 3 hours.
That's right. Won't blame you.
Hopefully Ben will cut it down to 15 minutes, which will probably be the only...
I think if you fast forward every 3 minutes, you basically get the...
Just listen to us on 2 times speed.
Right. Yeah.
Great time of year to talk climate because we've got the monsoon quickly approaching. Official start date is a week away, June 15th.
Here in Tucson.
So we got the monsoon. Of course, we're in the heat season, and the impacts of... the winter season and the dry spring is fire season is here. So we got a lot to cover. Drought's a big issue. And of course, there is some hints at an El Nino developing, which has some impacts not only on hurricanes, maybe a little bit on the monsoon,
right.
Winter precip. What else?
Finally, it's getting interesting again.
Last month was kind of interesting because we had the drought to talk about.
Did we make it interesting? I'm not so sure.
Your pessimism is already coming through.
Oh, no, you're trying to beat that out of me.
I say we start with the recap, how we got to where we are, and then we can move toward thinking about the monsoon and longer term.
Tosounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, Mike. So at least in southeast in southern Arizona, it's been close to 100. I think today is the 99th consecutive day of zero rain.
Zero rain. Yep. Since February 28th was the last time Tucson recorded any precipitation. The interesting thing about the record in Tucson is we had all of the rain between October and May. Over 80% of it happened in about 3 days in February. So prior to that, we had a rain event in early November, one in December. Not much to talk about for the rest of that period until that February event. A little bit at the end of February, and that was it. And we haven't seen a single
80%
drop.
in 3 days.
I think so. I think it could have even been higher than that. I didn't do the math. I was trying to do that in my head again. That was the eyeball regression.
The record, of course, 114 days.
114 days.
So 14 more days. So if the monsoon begins early, so that would make that like around the 22nd or 23rd.
Yep.
Then we won't break the record. But
looking at that metric there, and the longest I think you said was in 1950. But do you remember the dry spell in 2002?
I don't.
I had just moved here. I'd moved here about 6 months earlier.
So 2002 was 111 days.
111 days, and it
actually ended on July 7th.
So it took all the way to probably the beginning of the monsoon season at that particular year to crack it. That would suggest that there was precip later in the season in 2002 than there was even here. We hadn't seen precip since the end of February. We're in early June. We could easily crush that because you wouldn't expect to see any precip through much of June anyway. So you could throw 20 more days on our total today in a normal year with a typical monsoon onset.
Well, interestingly, so the top 5, the highest 114 days ended on December 30th.
That's kind of a strange spell.
And the 4th and 5th records, 108 days and 100 days respectively, ended on January 8th and January 1st.
So it would have been a handful of dry falls and then a handful of dry springs. I would have expected that it would have been the springs.
I would have thought it would have been the spring too.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Obviously, it's been very dry. What about temperatures?
The October through May period, for Tucson anyways, looks like it's going to be the warmest on record. And that's the record from 1948 through present. If we look at a couple other locations, I think you largely see that. But in the last 30 days, it was actually a bit of a roller coaster. I think when we recorded the podcast, we had already started to push a couple of 100-degree days in Tucson anyways. And it quite nicely moderated for the rest of the month. The storm track got busy across the west. We had a lot of these low pressure systems and troughs dropping down the west coast, and that was enough to take the edge off the heat down here.
But they didn't bring any moisture. It was just
no moisture. It looks like
cooler
there's
temperatures, windy conditions.
A little bit to California, a little bit north of here, but yeah, it's just out of reach this time of year.
I guess we should recap our bet from last month.
Did I win anything?
You did win again.
Yeah, see?
So we were trying to sum up what would be the total number of days above 100. Your bet was 7.
Yep.
My bet was 9. Climatology was 4. 6.
Yeah, see?
Those occurred in the first half of the month. Yeah, so temperatures in the first half, a number of days were, 10 to 15 degrees warmer than average. And then it as you said, at least in this area, temperatures were closer to average. And so that averages out to slightly above average temperatures for the month of May.
Yep.
And that adds to a string of months that have seen it above average temperatures.
Absolutely. And with that weather pattern, that trough kind of hanging off the west coast and coming inland and retreating, left Arizona cut in half, where the east side of the state ended up having above average temperatures, and the west side of the state had average to slightly below average temps. And then if you go into New Mexico, it was just soaring heat being under the ridge proper.
Okay, so no precipitation to talk about. Slightly warmer than average temperatures.
We did note in our podcast in May that there was an event at the very beginning of May for northern Arizona. So that's
right. Forgot about that.
And it was like on April 30th, May 1st. On May 1st, there was an event that edged in and goes into the monthly total.
Where I was going with that is very little precip, although that one event that you talked about.
Yeah, it was not of great consequence,
yeah.
Right?
Slightly warmer than average temperatures. Obviously, the story that we focused on last month was the drought picture. Drought had been deepening across the Southwest. If you look and you compare the statistics from the U.S. Drought Monitor from this month to when we did it right a month ago, obviously the drought picture hasn't changed, but they have colored the maps a little bit more severe than it was a month ago. So whereas a month ago, the worst drought category was about 10%. Now that's up to close to 16%. So exceptional drought, which is...
The exceptional is 1 in 50.
Yeah, 1 in 50 year event. The region that is experiencing that basically extends from the Four Corners down diagonally to southwest toward Flagstaff.
Yeah, it actually reaches, I think, right into Phoenix is where the end of the exceptional drought category.
So 73% of the state is extreme drought or worse, so that's up 10%. So it's the drought picture, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, obviously was not improved. There is some question, though, about whether or not you can actually expand drought in a month that historically sees no rain. But these are the sort of lingering effects.
I think so. I mean, the discussions that I was involved with were to continue to kind of catch up and reflect the conditions that had accumulated over the spring. Yeah, it was dry, largely. A little bit of precip fell, so clearly that would have slowed things down a little bit. And it was coolish, which is actually average, by the end of the month. So the changes were really still catch up.
So New Mexico is kind of a similar picture in terms of the change from one month to the other, from last month to this month. If you look at the state, though, basically the northern half is experiencing more severe drought than the southern half. Currently, it's experiencing about 18% in exceptional drought and close to 62% in extreme drought. So again, these are conditions that haven't been present, I believe, in the Southwest for quite some time.
Yeah, we haven't seen this much D3 and D4, which are the extreme and exceptional drought categories, since the spring of 2002. So when we pushed as hard as we could as far as the drought conditions in that pretty epic year, where the Rodeo Chetitskaya fire burned up, part of the Mogollon Rim, we had a pretty similar extent and coverage of that level of drought status.
That's interesting because obviously a key impact from the dry conditions and the widespread drought is fire. Currently, there's, I believe, 6 fires that are burning that are above 100 acres. The biggest of which is the Ute Park fire in northern New Mexico, which is partially contained, 35% contained.
That fire took off. It took off quick.
In that area, they've actually closed down Forest Service to camping. There's been fire restrictions for even before that for a long time. Now, Mike, there's only, and I say only, but there's only 6 fires burning.
Yeah.
I guess in some respects, that's kind of a surprising situation. Maybe one would expect there to be more. What's your take on this?
I think it's a testament to a lot of land management agencies jumping on the forest closures and being pretty serious about them in May. In the past, the Memorial Day weekend is a pretty dicey weekend, and that's, I think, always the concern, that you're going to have big fire starts in drought years on that particular weekend. The Wallow Fire and the Apache Sitgraves started on Memorial Day and took off and raged for many, many weeks. And we didn't really have that activity. And I think it's probably because of some of the closures and the enforcement that's actually happened across the state. I think that the fire weather conditions have kind of ebbed and flowed and moderated a little bit in Arizona, kind of coming and going. The wind is come and gone, but hasn't been as, persistent as we saw earlier in May. And a little bit of the humidity coming in, I think, ebbing and flowing over the last couple of weeks has probably helped on fire danger in Arizona anyways. New Mexico, with the Ute fire, had seen some extreme fire weather conditions. When you look at some of the national fire danger rating system, was in excess of the 99th percentile last week. With the heat of May, the dry conditions, and those dry conditions, if you think we'd been talking about Albuquerque, had seen just we thought it was bad over here, but it was really, really terrible in that part of New Mexico. Ended up having these extreme fire conditions converge. The Ute fire took off, but then within a day or two, they actually had a line of severe thunderstorms, dumped some precip across parts of New Mexico. But again, it's not a drought buster, but probably helping with some of the short-term fire risk. And we haven't had that in Arizona yet.
Interestingly, though, it's still been quite an active. If you look at the aggregate statistics, an active fire season, I think, looking at the stats for year to date, Arizona, about 70,000 acres have burned in Arizona, and New Mexico, close to 293,000 acres. Yeah. When you look at this in terms of average for Arizona, the median is about 101,000 acres. Mm-hmm. So we're getting close to being in the top 50th percentile there. And for New Mexico, it's 183,000. So New Mexico's already surpassed that. There's a number of years in both these states with some exceptionally large values, close to 1 million acres burned, and hopefully we won't get there. To your point, all things being equal, had they not done some active fire management, shut down campgrounds, or at least tried to restrict fires, then there would have been more. But we are now actually approaching into the time of the year when dry lightning comes in, and you get incursions of a little bit of moisture that produce dry lightning before the monsoon comes in force. So we're not out of the woods yet.
The fire season had the prospect of being as bad as any of our worst years based on the drought conditions, being similar to 2002, being worse than 2011 as far as the drought conditions. I expected, and I think you and I talked about this, is to be very nervous going through May. And there were a couple of fires that started that the resources jumped on and got under control really quickly. There was a fire start north of Heber Overgaard in the Mogollon Rim. I think that the cause was trailer chains dragging on the road, and so it sparked a series of fires down this highway, and very, very concerning in that area. But it was actually north of the rim, so it was in sort of that pinyon juniper, more brushy side, and the wind was pushing the fire to the northwest. So I think it was a little easier. It's about half 55% contained at this point, and the possibility of some precip coming in the next week, those are good things converging to help with that. But as you say, too, it's June 7th right now. Monsoon moisture, typically solid dew points, we're probably still a month out. And we're in this messy season where the humidity will help with fire behavior, but we're also going to be contending with the dry lightning.
So what about the wind? Was it just that, it only takes one fire for, with the conditions ripe for it to lose control and burn tens of thousands of acres.
Yeah.
And part of that is get these really windy days. You get persistent windy days, low humidity. What's been the wind situation?
It's ebbed and flowed. And the fact that it was cooler in May was mostly because of this active weather pattern and a trough off of the West Coast with these little low pressure systems coming in from the north. So in those days, you get this enhancement of the temperature gradient, enhancement of the pressure gradient, and you get wind that would come up with them. But it isn't anything like it was in, say, like 2011 when we had that very persistent, strong, deep cold trough across the west that just put us in the ringer between the subtropical high to the south and kept that pressure gradient there. And we just had howling winds out of the southwest every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. That was most of May into June when the monsoon ridge finally won out. it's been kind of ebbing and flowing. And so it relaxes every couple of days. And I think it's kept the air resources in the air so they can fight the fires. And overall, the places that the fires have started to probably are a little bit easier to get at. I mean, that's up on the rim on the flat country. The Ute fire, starting in these extreme fire conditions, but also starting in a location that's got lots of dry, very dry, live, heavy fuel. Those things can take off and explode and start to drive their own weather with those pyrocumulonimbus clouds. I think we've been lucky. We just haven't had those fire starts in those locations that take off in those ways. The Rodeo Chetasky fire, in that very dry spring of 2002, in late May into June, it wasn't windy at all in those months. We had a couple of windy days, but overall, that was just super dry fuel, fueling its own weather and exploding out and pushing off in every direction. That's still not totally out of the question. Mm-hmm. I am feeling more optimistic because that window's closing. We thankfully close that window as the monsoon creeps in here.
Right. So let's hope for an early onset for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Just looking at the severe fire potential map across the U.S. and its whole, the epicenter is, again, in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. It's labeled as severe. Other places, there are no other severe places besides in those 4 states. So this is our time.
It is. And I think Colorado, I think we should start looking north for the concerns of the fire danger at this point, because the monsoon will creep in here. And I think, as we said, it could be a messy start where we get lightning starts and we get wind pushing fires around from collapsing thunderstorms. The sort of dry storms end up producing not only lightning, but wind. And so there's still a dicey couple of weeks in our back pocket, but up in Colorado, they're still a ways out from probably picking up that moisture and that precipitation, and they're not solid monsoon country either.
So the monsoon, yesterday, off to the east, I saw a nice cumulus cloud.
I know. You probably wonder what it was.
What was it?
Ben actually thought it was a fire. He couldn't even,
what is that? He
couldn't even believe that it was a cloud.
It was
with water in it.
There was humidity around.
Yeah.
It was a prelude. I was like,
it was a prelude. Yeah. The flow pattern has shifted around in the last 4 or 5 days, where the subtropical ridge is actually over Texas or the sort of northern Mexico and into Texas, and there's a deepening trough of low pressure off of the California coast right now. And so we're in between those. And so we're in this sort of deep southwesterly, southerly flow there's been a little bit of thunderstorm activity in northern Mexico, and we're starting to see some of that seep it's creeping up into southern Arizona.
So what does this say for a forecast for the monsoon start?
Nothing.
If you look at...
I don't buy it. Yeah.
So if you look at some of the forecasts, again, the official date is June 15th, but
that's the season, right?
That's the season, but the monsoon doesn't start, well, historically, depending on what metric you're using, around July 4th.
Yeah, I think our old dew point definition, when we were looking at in Tucson anyways, was 3 days of daily average dew points of 54 degrees Fahrenheit. That was when we would call the onset of the monsoon.
According to the Climate Prediction Center, their seasonal forecast, they are painting a slightly optimistic picture of not the onset. They're not saying much about the onset. Right. They're just looking at the total rain, and there is some indication, air quotes indication, because we don't really know what that is. But there is some indication of increased chances for a wet monsoon, or wetter than
average.
Yeah, wetter than average.
Right. So a tick over the average would be a successful forecast.
Yeah.
So such a downer today. Break out from that.
So what do we think about this?
What do I think about this? I think it's a very gutsy forecast.
Last year it was equal chances.
Yeah. There was no forecast for above or below issued in June for the monsoon season last year.
My opinion, this monsoon season is probably the hardest season to forecast.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not going out on a limb there.
You're not going out on a limb out there. No, you're not being controversial.
And historically, there's probably very little skill in these forecast models for actually predicting what the monsoon would see. So why do you think, and maybe we don't have to get under the hood too much and into the minds of the forecasters at the Climate Prediction Center, but why do you think that there's a there's an above average call here.
The seasonal forecast models. And so this would be the dynamical suite of dynamical ones. And we've talked about the National Multi-Model Ensemble, right? I have a complicated relationship with NMME. Back in the Godzilla El Nino days, I hung on its every word, and it left me out to dry. It literally left me out to dry. So
before you go there,
okay,
let's stop. Yes. So the National Multi-Model Ensemble
we should explain what it is.
Yeah, is made up of 7 different modeling centers from around North America. So the National Center for Environmental Prediction in the U.S. has their CFS version 2, which is the one that the CPC prioritizes, if you will.
Yeah.
There's also GFDL, which is
Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory.
Okay. There's NASA. There's the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and then there's 2 Canadian models.
Yep.
Each one of these produces a suite of model runs. They then average them all together and come up with an NMME forecast.
Easy for you to say.
But you can also look under the hood at each of the different models and see what they're saying. Okay,
right.
So
yes.
with that.
So what?
I don't know. Maybe that's not interesting.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think, and it's one of many sets of tools that the official forecasters use at the Climate Prediction Center. It's not just the dynamical models. There's a bunch of statistical models that are used there. But many of them for the July, August, September season show above average precipitation for the Southwest.
That's right. In fact, all of them do. All 7 of them.
Okay.
With the exception of one of the GFDL's model, which has a wetter than average signal for Colorado and the Four Corners region, but not southern Arizona. But it does have a wetter than average signal for the Sierra Madre Occidental, which is the heart of the monsoon season. So if it's projecting a rigorous monsoon there, you would expect that it would also waft in our region as well.
Translate. Yeah.
It's hard to actually understand the processes behind these things. Yeah. They're forecasting the entire U.S., so it's not like they can
I don't think
deconstruct each region and talk about what the dynamics are of each region. I think that's something for you and I to do, at least in the Southwest.
I think that a couple of things at play. In the hurricane outlook for the East Pacific came out, and it's solid average with a lean towards above average activity. And there's plenty of warm water in the East Pacific. There's a lean or a progression towards an El Nino developing, and these are all favorable for enhanced East Pacific activity, which can be a positive for the monsoon season. It is not a slam dunker. It does not having that.
So in the literature, there are links, though, with the later season and El Nino. Some links.
Yeah.
Some associations.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's what's coming out in the official forecast. Not necessarily in precip totals, but in activity that could contribute. So this is a little bit like there's a couple causal links here, I think, that they're extending through this. The models, I think, are suggesting that having better access to East-Pacific moisture, or maybe that activity is going to induce more Gulf surges, or I don't really know. I don't even know if they see Gulf surges, quite honestly. So it almost looks like wetness by proximity is
so not necessarily a monsoon dynamic thing, more of a East Pacific tropical El Nino, but it's not actually simulating any monsoon dynamics.
I don't know if they can really do that.
Yeah.
I think that the dynamics are so fine scale that we know down here. It's not totally clear to me what these models would actually do correctly about the monsoon season. The truth in advertising here is when you apply the skill mask to this summer season with these models, everything is blanked out. For precip in the summer season, the skill mask says that there hasn't been past skill.
Right. And so what does that mean? So that means that historically, when they've predicted their projections of the July, August, September period have not proven to be accurate.
Right. It's a mask of confidence of past performance. There may be something in here that they're picking up on that is absolutely real. They're all consistently seeing it, all the models.
When you look at these 7, they have the same pattern, which is really dry in the Caribbean and sort of wetter in the Southwest.
Right.
And then drier in the Pacific Northwest for the most part. Actually, that's a little bit more variable. But dry in the Caribbean, which is also a pattern you see prior to the development of an El Nino.
Yeah. So I do think that there is El Nino hints being picked up in many of these forecast models. I love it when there's green on a map, but I don't know. I just don't know if I can swallow it whole. The 1 month July outlooks are quite robust as well. So which suggests that it's not just later season tropical activity that's sort of coming up here. It's that there's some sort of early season dynamic. And it's interesting. It's all Arizona. It kind of tails off as you get into New Mexico, and it's got a bunch of the Southern California coast, which would suggest to me more tropical.
So I don't know when this was run, but that wouldn't be picking up on the current tropical storm Aleta because that's projected to push, maybe even create the first Gulf surge of the season, push some moisture into our region.
Yeah, that's right, and it's interesting.
But it's not seeing that.
It's not. Yeah. So one of the areas that you see a lot of the hurricane activity form is off the southern coast of Mexico. That's a prime spot for a lot of the East Pacific storms to pop up. This 1 month forecast for July actually shows that area being drier than average. So I'm confused. I don't really know what would drive that. There is a harsh gradient of southern Mexico being much drier than average and northern Mexico along the mountain range being wetter than average. So I think that it's fun to play with these forecasts, and I enjoy the optimism that they're giving me, but I'm too old for this, man.
You've been around. You've seen too much.
This ain't my first rodeo.
I've been through the 2015 El Nino?
Oh, yes. I have that, so my T-shirt says. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
What about, I'm going to throw this out.
Okay.
What about a trend?
A trend towards what?
6 of the last 7 years have been wetter than average in Tucson for the monsoon.
Oh my gosh. A hot streak? Really? You're going to pull that out?
Believe it or not, yeah, I was looking at that. I mean, I'm being sarcastic here because there aren't any trends in almost all of the metrics that you look at. I haven't seen any for the monsoon.
No, I don't think so.
So no positive eyeball regression trends there.
That's my favorite kind.
But it is interesting to note that only 2013 was below average since 2011 for Tucson total.
Yes. This is Tucson, and your results and mileage may vary as you drive across the Southwest. That has not happened everywhere, for sure. It's also worth thinking about what actually happened last monsoon season. We had our first precip event after the 4th last year, and we were off to the races by the second week of July and basically did almost all of our monsoon by the end of July, and then we just kind of packed it in and coasted. I don't want to do that again.
I would take it.
Would you take it?
Absolutely.
You'd suffer through August and September similarly? It's
July.
like doing June over again and over again twice.
Though.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, at the end of the day,
August was like June with mosquitoes. That's what last year was like.
When you look at it, though, I don't know if you can ask for more. Mike, what do you want?
I want to pace myself.
All right, so I did this exercise. I was bored. I was bored today.
I love this. I think this is great. Okay.
So here's what I would want. This is my magical monsoon. Okay. It's a mismatch, mismatch, if you will. All right. So I would take June of 1950.
Okay.
1.4 inches of rain that fell, but basically in back-to-back storms. So
when did this happen in June?
This happened June 20th.
Okay. That's not bad.
So the reason there is let's quell the fires early.
Okay.
Right. Like
good.
Let's set the monsoon in. Let's bring it out. Yep. 1.4 inches would be we'd be off to the races. Okay. Prelude. People would be excited. About it. You know, some nice
fill some
nice clouds.
All the abandoned tires out. Abandoned tires with water. Start growing the mosquitoes early.
That's true. The mosquitoes. I can deal with the mosquitoes though.
Clearly, I can't.
All right. Then I would take July of last year.
That's your top pick? Yeah. This is your fantasy football monsoon thing going on here, right?
Yeah, okay. This is my second round draft pick.
Second round draft pick is July of last year. Wow.
July of last year. 7 inches. Okay. Right, in a 3-week period. But man, those were some.
I gave you that.
Those were some amazing days. Mm-hmm. The halcyon days.
You took some good pictures.
2017.
Yeah. All right.
that puts a lid on the fire season. You know, I could have picked, for example, the year, which I'm drawing a blank on right now, where there was actually an event late July with 3.93 inches of rain.
1958. Yeah, you pulled it up. Yep.
1958. I could have picked that.
So that was the daily. That's the most precip that Tucson has had in one day.
One day
in its record.
Yeah. I wonder what that was like.
Wet.
That's brilliant.
Probably
brilliant. Eloquent.
Probably floody. Floody's a word too.
All right, so that's 7 inches in July. Then I'd take August 1999. Now this may be a little interesting. There's many Augusts with more vigorous monsoon activity than August 1999. Only 3 inches fell, which isn't
okay.
that much above average. In 5 events, there were 2 events of close to an inch, but there was also a prolonged dry spell, 15-day dry spell, which I think you need.
Take a break. This is how you eat Thanksgiving dinner.
You have to have a moment of wonder about whether or not the monsoon's going to continue.
Tease
rile you up a little bit, and also reflect on how nice the monsoon is. So it's a teaser.
It's an intermission, right? So you can go get Junior Mints.
Right.
At the okay.
But then the monsoon fires up again at the end of August.
Okay.
So you have to have a dry spell.
In this 2 weeks. Yeah. Did you take care of your mosquito problem in your yard?
I haven't thought.
Okay, I'm just thinking about mosquitoes. Yeah. And did the dew point drop back down in the 20s? So I could at least go back outside and hang out.
Solid, the dew point drops down.
Okay.
But the temperature gets...
Is it too wet to rain? Ooh, what if 2 weeks of too wet to rain?
No, it dries out. It dries out.
Okay.
All right. So the temperature goes back up.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, and then September... Listen, I didn't want to model in a tropical, too big of a tropical storm. No, I didn't want to model in a tropical storm at all, actually, because I didn't want there to be any debate about whether or not it was monsoon from you. Oh, man. Right?
Man,
so September...
I can't go after this in any...
September 1974, 1.5 inches in September, 8 rain events. So there was a constant drizzle of monsoon moisture. No tropical storms that I saw. And there you have it. Total 12.9, which is not the record for Tucson.
This is like Moneyball monsoon picks here. It's kind of boring.
Monsoon.
Kind of boring.
Oh, you think it's boring?
Kind of boring. I mean, I would expect it more like more flair and I mean, at least 4 tropical storms in September. Okay, all named storms.
But think about this from last year. Like, think about if you had July, but also had a pretty darn good August and a pretty darn good September.
Okay.
I mean, just think about that scenario.
I think about it all the time, man. I live in that space.
And you don't think... All right, well, I want to hear yours.
I don't have one. I can't... Yeah, I would take you calculate up, if it rained the maximum on every day in the monsoon for Tucson, what was the total?
117 inches.
There you go. There you go. Why not, man? Live big.
Physically, you can't have that, man.
I know you can't have that, but that's what my team picks.
We should live through that scenario. What would that?
It wouldn't be healthy. It's not a good idea. Yeah.
So what do you think the
prospect is?
Yeah.
Climatology.
Oh man, so boring. Bet on climatology. Okay, so what is that?
Oh, it's 6 inches. We'll evenly get 6 inches. Honestly, I have no idea what's going to pan out this year. I think it's really interesting to see the East Pacific tropical activity ramp up and be a possible mechanism in this monsoon season. Didn't have that last year.
Gulf surges.
Yeah. The model, this is June 7th, and we're looking at a week out. There is a tropical storm, or maybe is it hurricane at this point? It's Aletta. First named storm in the East Pacific.
There's one behind it, too, south of it, that they're watching. Yeah.
Yep. Those are, on the models anyways, induce a kind of a Gulf surge type of thing. But again, at this time frame, everything can go off the rails, and it really is day by day. If we do induce a Gulf surge, we could get that moisture up in here and institute a start. But it also it's really early for the monsoon ridge to get in the correct position to sustain it. So we're still in this, I think, ebb and flow situation for a couple of weeks. It's I think tough to do solid monsoon activity. It's way too early, quite honestly. And as we get to the end of next week we'll be at the 15th, and so we'll be getting closer, but I still think it's early on that end.
It's also a little early for the ENSO forecasts.
It sure is.
And that seems to be driving, I mean, as you mentioned before, so the hurricane outlook for the East Pacific was average to slightly above average. There tends to be above average hurricane activity in East Pacific during El Nino years, in part because of reduced wind shear.
You need reduced wind shear to sustain tropical storms. Right?
There's also above average sea surface temperatures in that area. So those two things are playing into a slightly average to above average forecast.
Yep.
In the Atlantic is for below average hurricanes, or average to below average, so a slight tilt in the odds. And that's also an El Nino signal because there is increased wind shear in the Caribbean basin in the Atlantic, which suppresses hurricane and large major storm activity. And there's also cooler sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean that's contributing to that forecast.
Yeah.
But a lot of these forecasts, so the hurricane forecast, major storm forecast, and maybe even parts of the monsoon forecast are influenced by an El Nino, a nudge toward El Nino. And that is the forecast right now. Slightly increased chances for El Nino.
We're grasping for something to hold on to at this time scale, and it's a really tough time of year to try to do it with the seasonal predictability barrier. There is some evidence of a Kelvin wave coming across Pacific Ocean. There has been some warming. There's warming in the East Pacific, which is probably not El Nino related. There's other modes of variability. The Pacific meridional mode, which I don't totally understand, is part of the East Pacific temperature pattern and subsequently the tropical storm activity. So it's a pretty noisy time of the year to really lean into some of this stuff. But I think you see some movement in that direction. I do think it's really too early.
So what is it, another month more or less, or a couple months?
It's typically a June to July where you start to see stuff sort of lock in a trajectory. You start to look for the movement across the Pacific to sort of move you in that direction. But we've had some really late onset El Ninos in the last 5 years where you'll be watching and waiting, through the summer and through the fall season.
So the IRI CPC ENSO forecast calls for close to a 70% chance of an El Nino developing in the winter, virtually a 0% chance for another La Nina.
Yeah.
And I think the indications on the magnitude is anywhere between sort of a weak, very weak, sort of nominal El Nino to maybe even a moderate. But there isn't the indications like the subsurface water temperatures aren't preluding if an El Nino occurs, a very strong or intense El Nino.
But again, it's tough and too early.
Wouldn't we see that signal like a really intense?
I think so. I think that you'd start to see, and there is warm water across the Pacific, and there is a slug of warm water moving across in a equatorial Kelvin wave right now. So there's some of the pieces and parts that would be important to initiate an El Nino and sustain it, but it's too early to know if it's going to be self-reinforcing. Every year I become less certain, and so I waffle more.
Okay, I want you to be obnoxious.
Okay.
We have to project what the total monsoon precipitation for Tucson is going to be. This is our bet.
Okay.
So I'm going to make you operationalize your either your pessimism or your optimism, or if you want to be like lame about it and just bet on climatology.
How many decibel points do you want?
All right. So what do you think?
Is this like Price or Right? Can I have you go first?
Let me put it this way. The magic monsoon of 12.9 inches, which would finish third in Tucson.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's solid.
It's not going to happen.
It won't happen.
Because I was bullish last year and bet on above 10. I think I bet 10 inches in it. After July, I went whole hog.
You didn't even care. You were so happy with July. You were like, I don't know, who cares if we even cross 6?
My heart says above average to keep up this string of 4 in a row and 6 of the last 7. But I kind of think just based on those odds, like not based on anything dynamical, forget about that.
Yeah.
Like I think it's actually going to be a below average.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do.
So weird. But I can't get the number 7.5 out of my head.
Wow.
7.5 inches.
So what would that be?
That's
that would be like
130%. Total gut forecast.
I think it's going to be 5.75. Yeah, so it's going to be slightly below average for Tucson.
You know what's going to happen?
What's that?
Tropical storm Crimmins.
Oh.
September. It's going to be 5.75 that day. and it's going to be a 2-incher.
Tropical storm Crimmins.
Yeah, that's in the list this
I don't
year.
know. It can't be. Then
They go through first names, and they loop back around.
It would be the
and
third.
Then they take random last names. And
we'll have to submit that to the Weather Channel. Are they
think
the one? No, the Hurricane Center.
The Hurricanes. Yeah. No, the Weather Channel would use it. That's the problem.
Tropical. Lock it in the books.
I'll make it happen.
One other bet for June, though, and we're going to start keeping tally of this.
Somebody's got to win. Somebody's got to pay for some of these bets.
Yeah. We just need a running tally because I think you're smoking me. So June, the heat season.
Oh, right. Oh, yes. Okay.
We got to do something about temperature.
Okay.
So I propose let's do what's the maximum temperature.
Okay. The highest daily temperature that we observe in June.
The highest daily temperature that you observe in June. And just so people know, for Tucson, that's 117.
Yeah, the record.
In June.
Uh-huh.
Last year, we had those epic 3-day heat wave right around June 15th.
Father's Day heat waves.
Father's Day heat wave.
Yep. I coined that phrase, and I was like, that was my forecast this year, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
So to condition that, like what's on the near horizon?
Near horizon is a Gulf surge by the end of next week.
From Aletta.
From Aletta.
So that'll take the top off.
Well, it'll take the top off, and if moisture hangs around, it's real tough to, you're popping clouds around. That tends to take the edge off of it too.
So could that kick off a monsoon that sort of just hangs around?
Or it could just be this blech for a couple of weeks before the solid.
Humid, but the monsoon's not really firing up.
We've had that. I mean, June has that kind of messy start to it and we had it last year too, where we had moisture come in the last week of June and didn't do much. It just made it miserable. But it did take the edge off of the heat wave that happened the week before. So, but if you look at the forecast for whatever they're worth at this point, and just looking at where the ridge is, there's no ridge building across the Southwest. There's this funneling in of moisture and it hanging around. And it's not a real good, solid, strong start to the monsoon.
Can moisture present suppress the formation of the ridge?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, because if that were the case, every time it rained in the monsoon season, the ridge would retreat, and you don't see that.
Yeah.
And so it's much bigger, broader hemispheric dynamics that we're really looking for. Given that, there's not a heat wave, at least in the 7 to 10 day forecast, and I'm just looking purely at the ridge position. It's not overhead. A couple of models do bring the high pressure overhead. I still expect something may emerge in the forecast in the next 2 weeks. It's just because it's that time of year. It's the longest days of the year. If it's not popping thunderstorms everywhere and the moisture isn't real deep, you'd expect to see the heat get up. So,
with all that said,
I think we'll see a day that's 109 this year.
Okay, so the minimum maximum is 107. I'm going to go just a little bit higher, 110.
A little bit higher?
Yeah. I mean, how much?
See, that's why I wanted you to go first.
Fine, you gave
110.
You gave a compelling argument.
I did give you a compelling. So that wasn't. You weren't supposed to listen to that.
Yeah, well, I did.
You did.
There you have it. Okay, so to wrap up, next time when we come back, early July, hopefully, we'll have some monsoon to talk about. If not, we'll have something to talk about as well. Like,
we'll have something to talk
where
about.
The heck is it?
Yeah.
Update on the fire situation.
Really,
from then on in, it's we're sort of
easy
in the
sailing.
throes of the monsoon.
You're going to be in your favorite month of the year.
Yeah,
your hot streak of wet Julys will continue.
Yeah, there's also a big risk of creating a lot of anger because if the monsoon fizzles, if it produces 2 inches of rain, 2.5 inches of rain, gets on one of the driest, then we're. We're
the voice of that anger, though. That's what this podcast is. So we'll just verbalize it.
We'll have to send some ill will toward the people that we're projecting above average. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll come back in a month.
All right, happy June.
Happy June.
The Southwest Climate Podcast is a production of CLIMAS, which is part of NOAA's Regional Integrated Science and Assessment Program and is housed at the University of Arizona Institute of the Environment. Mike Crimmins is a principal investigator with CLIMAS, a professor of soil, water, and environmental science in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and climate extension specialist with the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. Zack Guido is a research scientist with the Institute of the Environment and UA program manager of the International Research and Applications Program. The podcast is edited and produced by Ben McMahon, Research, Outreach, and Assessment Specialist with CLIMAS.
going to throw out my magical monsoon. Worked on it all morning.
Magical monsoon mystery sewer?
Yeah. My magical monsoon. It's my monsoon of preference.
Oh, you did? You
did.
You worked it up?
I worked on it.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
I didn't do it.